The bonds between fathers and daughters is something that we see occasionally in One Piece. We saw that recently with Cobra and Vivi, and we saw that way back at the beginning with them. Nami and Nojiko with Genzo. Let's see, any other father-daughters we've seen? Pound with Chiffon and Lola. We've seen that one go through quite a bit. Riku with his daughters, with Scarlet and Violet. And then, yeah, Kyros with Rebecca, definitely. Other father-daughters. Well, I would definitely say with Yasue and Otoko during Wano, we saw that bond. And then we saw between Odin and Okiku. Well, it was more brother, big brother, little sister bond in that regard to a degree. But between Odin and, I know her name. Why can't I remember her name? Hiyori. I know her name with Odin and Hiyori. We've seen, throughout the course of One Piece, we've seen various representations of the bonds between fathers and daughters. And this video is kind of about the newest representation of that we've seen in regards to Kuma and Bonney, which was much more confirmed within the last two chapters, although from what I understood, there was something where there had been something in their sketch art that denoted that their father-daughter relationship from several years ago in a data book. Also, I pulled out one of my Iron Man shirts because out of all of the people in Marvel that we've seen beyond Thanos and Gamora, which is not a good explanation of a father-daughter relationship, we have Tony and Morgan that we see in Endgame with their relationship as father and daughter and everything. And I would say Tony kind of qualifies a little bit as a cyborg at this point in time, considering that he has technically modified his body at various points in time throughout the course of the Iron Man and the Marvel movies. And, the I Love You 3000. And we did get the adorable picture in the slight flashback where we saw with, giant Kuma and tiny Bonney. And he's holding her up and looking very happy and everything. So this is kind of going to go over stuff that we learned within the last two chapters in regards to Bonney and Kuma and their relationship, and some of the other things that we saw kind of referenced throughout the other parts of the series in regards to their connection to each other to a degree. We knew that they were both from the Sorbet Kingdom, and that Bonney had kind of a different identity as Connie, the Dowager Queen of the Sorbet Kingdom, and I'll go over that a little bit later because I have some theories about that. Some theories about that. We'll see what happens. We'll see where this video leads. Basic things about the two people. For Kuma, he is of course both Bartholomew Kuma. Bartholomew. I can talk. Bartholomew Kuma, who is, of course, a former warlord of the sea. He's the former king of the Sorbet Kingdom, is or was an officer within the Revolutionary Army, and he is, unfortunately, currently a slave for rent in Marie-Joie, or he was until he was very recently liberated from that post by Sabo and the revolutionaries. And now he's currently on Kamabaka Kingdom with Dragon, where he's probably going to explain to Dragon kind of what happened while he was in captivity and such, kind of see where that goes. Which I may touch back on that, but we'll see. I'm not really aiming for what happened for Kuma while he was there and his full-on relationship with the Revolutionary Army, although I will touch on that. But I'm not really going to dig into what happened at Reverie beyond the fact that Bonney was there and that she probably witnessed some of what happened. And I'll go over that when I get to that part with Bonney. Kuma was also referred to as, the Tyrant, and he is PX0. He is the human weapon called the Pacifista that was developed by Vegapunk and everything. And how he had himself modified, and he has lasers, and he has different mechanical pieces inside of him and everything, to the point where I don't even think Kuma can feel pain at this point in time, or if he does, he's not registered. It doesn't register to the point that it's something that he needs to act upon. because we see him go through physical abuse during the time when he's the slave for rent up in Marie-Joie and such. We see him unfortunately go through a fair amount of physical abuse with all the swords we see inside of him, stabbed inside of him by the world nobles, and then we see, I think it's Roswald is the one that's riding him, like whacks him with like a hammer or something like that, like a mallet of some kind. Unfortunately, so we kind of see some of that for like the abuse that he's currently gone through. Also, he went through a fair amount of abuse during like the part of the 2-year time frame when he was, guarding the Thousand Sunny and waiting for, any of the Straw Hats to show up, and then until Frankie showed up. But I'll go over that a little bit. So basically the timeline that we have for Kuma is that, we know that at some point in time in the past, he was the king of the Sorbet Kingdom, and at some point in that time frame, he either had, like, him and his wife gave birth to Bonney, or him and his lover, depending on whatever the situation you want to go with. I may throw in a harebrained tinfoil theory at the end of this in regards to Bonnie's parentage, but I just want to go over something else, go over the rest of this first before I go down that path. One of the things that we see is, he's referred to as the tyrant and everything of the Sorbet Kingdom, and, that he was this tyrannical pirate that was brutal beyond measure. And whether or not that was just, he was actually a good king to his people, and then it just appeared like he was a tyrant, and that's what the world government wanted to paint him to be, and Morgan's like, oh, that's a better story than like a good king, blah, 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 went along with it. That could be part of it. And we don't know exactly when he joined the Revolutionary Army. We know that Kuma is, I think he's 47 years old, so he would have been 45 years old when we first met him, pre-time skip. So we don't really see too much of that. We know little bits about that he was, the king of the Sorbet Kingdom, and that he had Bonney as his daughter, either adopted her or something along those lines. But one of the other things that we see in regards to his early life is that Oda at one point drew all of the different warlords as kids. And we see Kuma. And Kuma seems to be wearing very ratty clothes and everything, and he already has his bibble with him and everything. Or a bibble. Probably not the same one, because that would have been a very large book for even a small child to carry around, depending on how large Kuma was as a child. But, we see him, and he looks like very ratty clothes and everything like that. Like, he doesn't look like he's, like that he's got a lot of money. So kind of my thought in that regard is like, okay, so Kuma was probably born on the Sorbet Kingdom, and then he, grew up there in like probably a fair amount of poverty, and then either because of his, his size and his maybe inherent strength, he ended up being able to, build a following around him, and maybe either he married into the royal family, which is a possibility. We don't know if he married into the family and like maybe his wife was like the princess, and like maybe he got himself to that, regard, and then he became the king by marrying the princess and, took on that role. We don't exactly know. That hasn't been explained to us, but that's one theory that could go. Or it was because he's referred to as the tyrant king, that maybe he ended up, gathering a following of, enough people, and then he like did a revolution within the country itself, and then it actually maybe went from a really bad place to live into a better place to live, but Kuma was still seen as a tyrant because maybe he overthrew this other tyrant, and as I said, the world government just painted him as this horrible, as this tyrant. And then at some point in time, he ended up joining the Revolutionary Army, also in that time frame, since, well, when Bonnie's in her, adult form, she's like 22 to 24 years old physically is what she looks like. And with her devil fruit, she can, of course, age herself up and down, and we don't know exactly what her true age is. That may end up getting revealed within this arc, since she's probably going to be a big part of the arc. We'll see what happens there, but we also know that Bonney mentioned within the last chapter, or the last two chapters, that she remembers coming to Egghead at one point when she was a child, and that she remembers meeting Vegapunk because she took one look at Atlas after Atlas said, well, I'm Dr. Vegapunk, and Bonnie's thought is, no, you're not. So Bonney knows what Vegapunk looks like. So if at whatever point in time either the Straw Hats may ask her what Vegapunk looks like, Or it might just be that, they actually meet the real Vegapunk and Bonnie's like, yeah, no, that's him. Or they find his body in like cryostasis or something like that. She goes, nope, that's the real Vegapunk. I recognize that horrible sweater. Um, but we don't know exactly. But she knows that we know that at some point in time when Bonney was a child, she went to Egghead. Whether or not she was like a very young child at that point in time, because we don't know when Egghead was established. We don't know exactly when she would have gone there, when Kuma first had that interaction with, had that first interaction with, Vegapunk. If it was like, oh, maybe it was before Kuma joined the revolutionaries, maybe he went to Vegapunk and ended up meeting with him, or during the time frame that he was in the revolutionaries and then he left the revolutionaries to go undercover and become a warlord, because I don't remember if we ever get an exact answer as to when Kuma became a warlord. We know that during the time frame, about 12 years ago, before the current storyline, he was, part of the Revolutionary Army, because he's there when the Revolutionary Army shows up and like saves all the people when the Gray Terminal is burning, when they save a bunch of them and everything. And then, he's there when like Sabo wakes up. And we get like a flashback episode for Sabo, which is like technically it's filler, but it's filler I'm okay with, because it kind of fills in some of the gaps for like what Sabo was doing while Ace and Luffy were growing up on the Goa Kingdom. And we see Sabo and Kuma there. Like, Sabo tries to fight Kuma, but he always says that, like, Kuma was so kind and gentle and all this other stuff, that he wasn't this horrible tyrant that everybody made him out to be. And I know that people have been like, well, maybe Dragon made him better. Maybe, when Kuma met Dragon at some point, he, made Kuma into a better person. Whatever. We don't know. That could be the case. That could not be the case. It could have just been Kuma was already a good person, but the government just wanted to make him seem horrible, and that's why they made him the tyrant. And then, at some point in time, he then, left the revolutionaries under, the guise of going to join the world government and become a warlord. And then he allowed himself to be experimented on by, Vegapunk. And we see up through the point when, the first time we see him is during the Jaya arc, I believe. We see him and Doflamingo arrive at, I think it's at Marine headquarters or whatever. And like they have like a conference with Mihawk and Sengoku and Suru and everything about what's going on. And, about Crocodile being dethroned as, a warlord and everything. And we see Kuma there, and he doesn't really do much. And then we see him again when they end up, the next time I believe we see Kuma is on Thriller Bark. When he shows up there, we see him, show up and like intimidate the heck out of Perota, which is not surprising. And seeing we just saw her get defeated by, Usopp intimidating the heck out of her is probably not that hard to do. And then he just, pops her away and sends her off to, Mihawk's Island. Everybody thinks she's like, I don't know, he blew her up or something like that, because we don't know until later what happened. But, and then he, we see him have this whole interaction, he has this interaction with, Moria, and then he has the interaction with the Straw Hats and everything, where he tries to take Luffy, but Zoro stops him, and then he makes the deal with Zoro with I'll take out all of your captain's exhaustion and injury and everything, and then if you take all that in and you survive, then I'll leave him alone. And and we do that, and that's where you get the nothing happened moment for Zoro, of course, which is just one of my favorite moments in the entire series. Most people's favorite moments in that. But we see that, and he leaves, which means he still has some form of his own opinion on that, own cognizant decisions that he can make. Even though he was told to bring in Luffy, he doesn't do that. And then later on at Sabaody, he still, he splits up the Straw Hats and sends them all off. So we don't know exactly if it was that was like innate orders from like something from Dragon that was part of that like, oh, like, I don't know if Kuma knew at that point in time that Luffy was Dragon's son, But out of one of the few people that would know, I would say Kuma would be one of them. But the thing is that Ivankov didn't even know that Dragon had a son. Ivankov didn't even know Dragon's full name. But the fact that Kuma was part of the world government may have been that, like, either he had access to other information. Maybe through that information, that's how he found out that, Luffy was Dragon's son. And then he's just like, oh, well, I should probably keep an eye on this kid. He is a Will of D. He's also Garp's grandson. That's kind of evident there with the last name and everything. So, yeah, Kuma is would have been one of the few people in the government that maybe knew about that relation between Luffy and Dragon. Even though Ivankov didn't know about that, which is strange. But Kuma did, Ivankov didn't. Bit of an odd thing there. And, so Kuma, sends all the Straw Hats flying and everything. And then after that is when it's kind of stated that because he technically disobeyed orders and didn't, like, apprehend all the Straw Hats, that's where the Marines were just like, oh, that's just like the world government, just like, oh, we're just going to take away the rest of his, whatever his free will is left, we're just going to take that away from him. So that way he is forced to obey us. And at that point in time, we do see, next time we see Kuma is at Marineford, and, he knows, he recognizes Ivankov, but he's just in, like, his pacifista mode. He doesn't actually, do anything to try to help Ivankov. He's, like, actually causing against stuff, and Ivankov is very angry about this. And, Ivankov is very much like, but Kuma was our ally, and he was a friend, and he's not supposed to act like this. He's not supposed to be this horrible thing. He's really nice. And we get that same answer from, like, Sabo later on, and probably, Koala and Hack would probably say the same thing. I don't remember if we ever get an explanation from Koala and Hack about, like, how they feel about Kuma. We know that the rest of the Revolutionary Army commanders, Morley and Karasu and Lindbergh, wanted to get Kuma out of Rijwa, and they succeeded in that. We found that out. But we don't know exactly if it is how much everybody else has, their opinions or relationship with, Kuma. And let's see, the Sorbet Kingdom is, I believe, in this, I want to say where's Sorbet Kingdom? Sorbet Kingdom in the east or no, it's not in the East Blue, I know that. It's not in the North Blue. I want to say the Sorbet Kingdom is in the West Blue, I think. And I was trying to remember which of the commanders was the commander of the West Blue at this point in time, and I do not remember which one it is, and I'm sorry. I want to say it's either Bello Betty or Morley, but don't quote me on that. I don't remember which one is the one that's in charge of the area that the Sorbet Kingdom would have been in as the revolutions. And we may find out that, because we don't know anything else about the Sorbet Kingdom at this point in time either, except that at one point in time they were obviously invited to Reverie, but they haven't been for a while because Kuma's not there anymore. Kuma's not their king. Bonney gets under the guise of being Connie, which I will get to. But we don't really know too much else about that. But, after everything that happens at Marineford, Kuma then goes and spends the 2 years protecting the Straw Hat ship. He, tells Rayleigh and Shocky when he shows back up, well, Shocky, who's the one that's there at the time, he tells her, I'm here to protect the Straw Hat ship and everything. And then, like, we find out later that was, like, the last command that he had Vegapunk implant in him of just, like, you go and for, 2 years or whatever, you will protect the Straw Hat ship. And we see that Kuma has all of these scars, and, we see, like, at least 1 or 2 swords or whatever sticking out of him from protecting the ship for that time frame until Frankie showed up. And then Frankie tells the Straw Hats what happened when they're on their way to Fishman Island, and they're just like, oh, well, that's strange. So yeah, there's that. But there's a lot that goes into that part about, like, so when was Kuma no longer Kuma, And is there any part of like Kuma that can be saved? But now I want to talk about where he falls with Bonney. So, as I stated before, Jewelry Bonney, technically her name is probably Bartholomew Bonney at this point in time, but she's called Jewelry Bonney. She's, Big Eater. She's one of the 12 supernova and the worst generation. She's the captain of the Bonney Pirates. South Blue. Okay. Sorbet Kingdom is in the South Blue. Okay. I knew I had that written somewhere in the notes. I just couldn't remember. So South Blue is where that is. And, she's, daughter of Bartholomew Kuma and everything. She's, been part of the story since the Saba Odi archipelago and everything. And, she's estimated to be about 24 years old or so, or at least that's kind of physically what she tends to look like. So then in that regard, if she is actually about 24 years old and Kuma is about 47 years old, then he would have either had her, would have had her when he was about 23 is where that would have landed. So don't really know about that. I do have a thought on that, but I wanted to go over some of Bonney information first. She's technically the former princess of the Sorbet Kingdom at this point in time is where that would fall. So we have our princess for the arc, as everybody keeps pointing out, but I like Bonney anyway, regardless of whether or not she was a princess. A lot of people thought that there was the connection between her and Kuma anyway. We see her at Sab Oda. We know at some point during the time frame while Luffy was first starting his journey that her and her crew, the Bonney pirates, sailed away from the Sorbet Kingdom and ended up making a name for themselves and getting all the way to, Saba Odi and as a supernova and everything. So we see that during that time frame. We find out about that during Saba Odi from Shaki. And Bonnie's crew seem to be pretty loyal to her. She doesn't seem to be like the type of abusive person to her crew or anything like that, beyond the fact when they don't get her food fast enough. More food! I love the fact that our first interaction with Bonney is this very attractive woman just sitting on a table and just like scarfing down as much food as she can get. I find that so funny. And then we see just Beige's reaction to her, and he's just like, oh God, make her stop. I just find that hilarious. And then, of course, while they're at Saba Odi, she saves Zoro from getting shot by, Charlos and everything. And, basically, talks down Zoro from, talks him down from, why did you do that? That was a celestial dragon. Are you an idiot? Where are your two brain cells? Because clearly they're not rubbing together. In that regard. And how much she just, gets angry at him. And then she gets kind of angry at the Straw Hats anyway, because they are technically the ones that cause. Well, no, Luffy is the one that straight up causes what happens on Saba Odi with Kuma being sent and the pacifistas and everything like that. And there is the question of so when Kuma was on Saba Odi, Bonney was on Saba Odi as well because they hadn't left yet. Because Bonney and her crew hadn't left yet. Did Kuma end up seeing Bonney during that time frame? And if he did, was it anything beyond just, oh, this is Jewelry Bonney, she has a bounty of this much, blah, 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 capture her? We don't know. That might be something we get in a flashback this arc, that maybe we'll get a moment where, Bonney, has a flashback. Maybe we'll get, a chapter, well, maybe not, a full chapter flashback for Bonney, but maybe we'll get, a flashback for Bonney beyond the tiny little bit of one that we got in this chapter. We might get more of a flashback in an upcoming chapter where we get some more information as to, oh, this is what Bonney and Kuma's relationship was. Clearly she loves her father. That is not in any question or oh my God, does she even care about him? No, she clearly loves her dad. That is very blatant in the way that she kicked Luffy in the face to protect something that looked like her dad. That is most definitely not actually her dad. But I do put this as Bonney knew that Kuma was on Marie-Joie, was in Marie-Joie, because she saw him there. But she doesn't necessarily, she may know that he got taken away from Marie-Joie, but she doesn't know where he is. And this is also probably the closest thing that she's seen to her father in a while. And she was kind of out of contact with anybody else for a while, so that could be her dad. Luffy and the others know that it's a pacifista, that it's not actually her father. And as far as we're aware, I don't think any of the pacifistas actually have any of like Kuma's memories inside of them. That would seem a little bit stupid, but depending on what Vegapunk's plan is and where their actual allegiances lie with the world government, considering that the government's on their way to kill him, sending their assassins to kill him. Kuma, all the different Kumas, the pacifistas may be able to, may have Kuma's memories in them. May not. We'll find out, but I don't expect them to. But, we saw Bonney's reaction to what happened with Ace. We saw her, how sad she was when Whitebeard died. During all of that, during the broadcasting of the battle at Marineford and everything. And probably some of that was also from like seeing this, whatever bits of her father she saw there on screen. And then we know that like her and her crew headed into the new world, where they were promptly then, captured by Blackbeard and then basically sold out to the world government when, Akainu shows up and, captures her. We know that Blackbeard, like, well, you're not that strong, but you're pretty, so would you like to become like one of my, I don't know, harem, wherever Blackbeard wants to throw that. No. Pretty sure Bonnie spit in his face. I don't know. In headcanon, she spit in his face and said no. And then, Akainu shows up, and Akainu probably knows who she is, because later on, when we find out that she escaped, she's the only one that escaped, not her crew. That may have been like a choice where she had to like either escape or die, and like her crew might be in Impel Down right now, and because they may have some knowledge of who she is, it might be like they were like guards of hers when she was the princess, and then they went with her. But we don't know too much else about her relationship with them. They seem loyal, and she does seem to care about them. But she does seem to prioritize her own safety, which is, I mean, she probably treats them better than like Hawkins treats his crew, considering that Hawkins kind of basically uses his own crew as, voodoo dolls to protect his own skin. I don't know exactly what that one would go with, but Bonney may end up doing something where like they get like her crew back at some point in time. Like she'd be like, oh, like, well, my crew is in Impel Down right now. I managed to escape before they took us all to Impel Down, and I got out, but my crew is there. They didn't, we don't know any of her crew having bounties. So even if they did have bounties, they would probably be within like I'd say probably the first 2 floors of Impel Down, maybe the first 3, give or take, depending on stuff. But, it would be, interesting to see what Bonney says about her crew at some point. But Bonney has, and then like after she escaped, she's just basically on her own for like kind of 2-ish years or so, depending on when she escaped. I don't think she caused another prison break at Impel Down, but she managed to escape somehow. And then, this is where we find out that she can, turn into like an old woman, and, well, we already knew she could age down to a child, but I wonder what's the lowest age Bonney could go to. Because we see her revert, like, the Marine soldiers into, like, little children and, like, old men. And I would assume, like, well, we know that she tried to use that technique on Douglas Bullet in Stampede. But considering he had really, really strong hockey, I don't necessarily think it would have really done much on him. On other riffraff and stuff like that, or people that don't have, like, high levels of hockey, it's probably a lot easier for her to manipulate their age. And then, because, okay, I'm going to use a reference from another movie. So in film Zed, on One Piece film Zed, we have Ayn, who has the power to, like, she can take away, like, 12 years of someone's, like, age. As in, like, she ages Chopper down by 12 years. And Nami and Robin ages them all down by 12 years at the beginning of the movie. And then at the end of the movie, when she's defeated by Zorro, they all get their ages back and everything, and they're all back to like their correct age. Brooke too. She aged down Brooke also. Sorry, Brooke. And she did that to them, and she when she was defeated, all of everybody else's ages return. But we just saw in the chapter with Law where he got turned into a girl because Rule 34 and Rule 63. Hello, have fun. We saw with that Law was able to counteract what Doc Q did to him, and got back to his correct gender by his hockey being strong enough to fix that. So I don't know if it's necessarily that like, oh, Bonney would be able to like affect the soldiers, but like if she maybe tried that on like Sengoku or Garp or something like that, like maybe it would last for like a very short amount of time, but not very long, if at all, if she managed to actually touch them in that regard. Because sometimes you see her actually have to physically touch someone to affect them, and then in other cases she has to, just using like a wave of her power will do it as well. So I don't really know, but in that regard, we also know that Bonney, shifts her age and she turns into Connie and everything. And in regards to her relationship with Vegapunk, as I stated, she went to Egghead Island at one point when she was a kid, and now she's returned to Egghead Island however many years later because she has business with Vegapunk, because she wants to find out why Vegapunk did that to her dad, because he's just like, I have questions and I desire answers, and Vegapunk is going to give me the answers that I want, or I'm going to crack this island wide open. Okay. Side tangent. We don't know when Bonney got her devil fruit. We don't know if she got her devil fruit while she, after she became a pirate and she found it, or if she had her devil fruit since she was a child, like, she ate it when she was a child. What if Vegapunk is the one that gave her devil fruit? We know that Kuma has a devil fruit, the Niku no Mi. We don't know exactly when he got it. Probably a while ago, probably long before the start of the story, like maybe even before he was a member of the Revolutionary Army. What if Vegapunk is the one that gave Bonney her devil fruit? Or maybe she ate it while she was at his, facility at Egghead or something like that, and that might explain where that came from. So, don't know. That side tangent I thought of. There's a couple options for Bonney's devil fruit for where she got it, but not sure yet. And then there was, we know that Bonney wants to find, during the, after the time skip, we know that she was on her own. We know that she ended up making her way to Marie-Joie somehow. For some reason, I remember like King Elisabello was like part of that or something like that, that like the Sorbet Kingdom and his kingdom, I think the Proden's kingdom was his kingdom, that those kingdoms were actually friends, and that like he took Connie, to Reverie with him. For some reason, I remember that. I do not 100% remember if that is true or not. If that's not true, I'm sorry. I made that up in my head. But she, as little old lady Connie, dowager queen, she made her way into the dragon's city and everything, and found her way there. Got her way inside, and then she saw her father. And at the time, we don't know 100% know about that relationship, but she saw him, and the way that he was being treated by Roswald and by the others made her extremely sad and extremely upset. Now, there's options for what happened here. Maybe she ended up getting teamed up with like the Revolutionary Army and Sabo, because she mentioned she saw Sabo on, at Marie-Joie during the Reverie and everything. And which now means that Reverie had several princesses at it that have all been Princess in the Arcs. It had Vivi, it had Shirahoshi, it had Rebecca, technically Scarlet as well, because Scarlet is a princess, and then it also had Moshiri, who was also a princess. Um, and then it also had, now Bonnie was there as well. They didn't all interact, but Bonnie was there as well. So Hell had several princesses of the arcs in the same area, which is kind of fun. Um, and one of the things is, we know that Bonnie saw Sabo at the very least, and maybe she saw what happened with Kobar, or saw that the Revolutionary Army saw Sabo and Morley and Karasu and Lindbergh able to like save Kuma. And there's the thought of like, was Kuma able to like use his devil fruit to like pop her away and then send her flying, and then that's how she ended up where she is now at Egghead Island, which is quite a ways away from, Marie Joie and Reverie and everything. It's quite a distance away. So was she, is that how she got sent there and then ended up on a ship, and then maybe the ship capsized or something like that, or whatever? How did she end up in the giant eddy of swirling water? I don't know. We'll find out, I'm hoping. But now she wants to get to her dad or get to Vegapunk and find out what the did you do to my dad. I did want to go over a few theories in regards to Connie, or in regards to Bonney and Kuma, and then Connie. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that in Bonnie's picture that we saw that that Oda drew of like all the different supernovas as kids, we see Bonney, in like kind of ragged clothes and like stuffing her face and everything. So my thought, I've got two thoughts on this, and hear me out on both of them. A, Kuma was already king at this point in time, and he ended up finding Bonney, and because he had been in a similar situation when he was a kid, of being a child and starving and hungry and homeless and everything, or poor at the very least, and maybe he adopted her and she's not his biological child, or he maybe married her mother, and then same difference of maybe she wasn't an orphan, maybe she had a mother and like he married her mother or whatever. Or it was, and hear me out on this one, hear me out on all of these, I guess. What if it was he'd become king and like he'd overthrown the previous royal family, and maybe Bonney had been the daughter of the daughter or the granddaughter of like the previous king, and Kuma, because Bonney was a kid and she hadn't done anything wrong, and like maybe her parents or whatever had been horrible, but like he's like, she doesn't deserve to be punished for something her parents did, and took her in and adopted her that way. The other thought that I had was, what if Kuma had Bonney and she is his biological daughter, and he had her before he became king, and then when he became king, she then becomes the princess. And then depending on when Bonney ate her devil fruit, she was then able to age herself up into being like, the old Queen Connie. Because the other people recognized her as Connie. So the other option is either A, okay, well, let me finish up this thought first about Kuma and Bonney in this regard. And then she would just age herself up into Connie and pretend to be Kuma's mother. But the thing is that Dowager Empress or Dowager Queen implies that she was queen at one point and she is no longer queen, and her son or her daughter is now the ruler. Basically that would imply of like she's the one that had been queen up until whatever point in time her husband died or whatever, and then they finally had an heir of age, and then that heir took the throne. Which happens in various monarchies, has happened over the years, depending on stuff. It usually depends on like how old the current living heirs are at the time, and if the heirs are too young, then like the current queen, even if her husband's died, she still gets to stay queen for a while until like her child is of ruling age, and then she steps down, and then her child is then the new king or queen. Depending on certain circumstances, and then she is, the dowager queen at that point in time. And the only reason I know what dowager meant even before that is because of the animated movie Anastasia, because they mentioned like the Dowager Empress was Anastasia's grandmother, so she's no longer the queen of, was no longer the Empress of Russia. So that's the only reason I remember that. At some point in time, I will do a review of the movie Anastasia because I love that movie. Moving on. But the other thing that I wanted to point out in regards to the Connie theory is that if that was the case, either it was, Bonney would age herself up into Connie, and maybe there had been a Queen Connie, and this falls into either the Kuma was already, was the heir to the kingdom anyway, and he, became king or whatever, and then, his mother was no longer queen, or if it was, okay, and follow me on this logic. If Bonney, because the fact that people think that Bonney aged up is Bonney, flip that around. If the fact that people think that Bonney aged up is Connie and she can pass for her, then that means that Connie and Bonney, if there ever was a Dowager Queen Connie, her and Bonney have to be related. Because Bonney can change her age, and yeah, she could like dye her hair or whatever, but if she's running around with like pink hair as an old woman, then that implies that whatever Connie had been, she had pink hair as well. The piercing in her eye is a little bit left up for debate. So there's that concept. But the other one is, if it had been that Queen Connie at the time had been, the queen of the kingdom, and then if Kuma came in and dethroned her and her husband or whatever, or her son, and then Kuma became king, and then if Connie had a daughter or a granddaughter that was of, a certain age or whatever, if she had like a daughter, then maybe Kuma married the daughter, and then they had Bonney, and then that's why Bonney looks like Connie. Or if it had been that Queen Connie, Dowager Queen Connie, had been, the queen, and Kuma came in, took over and everything, and the previous family has been deposed, so kind of basically what happened in Dressrosa, except maybe they were actually horrible, horrible kings and queens, possibly, or like maybe at least the king was horrible, but the queen wasn't so horrible, so kind of like Judge and Sora. And then if it had been that like Connie had a had a granddaughter, then Kuma like adopted the daughter and like took Connie under his protection. And then eventually it was, Connie would accompany them to like Reverie when Kuma went to Reverie, whenever that would have been. He was probably king for long enough. He probably went to at least one or two Reveries. And if Connie had been the previous ruler, or a previous ruler, then she probably would have gone to Reveries as well, and that's why they know who she is. Also would explain why she would have a relationship with like Elisabello II. At least I think that's the one that I think gave her the ride. I don't remember. And so there's that. But then if it was that, Connie died at some point in time, then maybe because Bonney can age herself up to look like Connie, then, age herself up that she looks enough like Connie that she can pass as her own grandmother. Either way, then she, that's how she got into Reverie. But I don't know exactly what to say to that, but with as little as information can get out to other countries, and we don't know how much contact the Sorbet Kingdom has with other countries, it may also just be that, like, Bonney ate her devil fruit when she was a kid at some point in time, and then she aged herself up into, like, this old woman, to, like, practice with her devil fruit, and she wanted to, like, accompany her father to, like, Reverie or whatever, so, she had aged herself up into Connie, and then, they just called her Connie, and then he took her to Reverie with him and just said, oh, this is my mother, or whatever. Tiny little old woman, giant Kuma. Yeah. So I'm hoping we get a Kuma and Bonney flashback. Pretty sure we'll get a Kuma and Bonney flashback at some point in this arc. If not, Oda, please. And we'll hopefully get a little bit more information about that. This video went longer than I intended. I apologize. These last several ones have gone longer than I intended. Sorry, but I have different theories that I wish to talk about. And then there's going to be the whole thing of like Bonney, Bonney ends up meeting Vegapunk, and maybe he explains, well, your father wanted me to turn into that and everything, but I have this, I have all of your father's memories right here, and I kept it with me and kept it safe. And he told me to either give it to you if you ever showed back up, or to give it to the Straw Hats if they showed back up, or whatever. So that way it can get back to him. And if you put this back inside of the pacifista that was your father, the original one, the PX0, if you put this back inside of there, then he will have all of his memories and emotions back. And that might be the case. Maybe, take this, put it inside of your dad, I don't know, he has like a CPU drive or something like that. There's a floppy disk somewhere that you can put into Kuma that has all of his memories on it or whatever. There's a USB port, I don't know, that you can plug into Kuma. And maybe that'll be what happens. And then like Kuma will maybe get like enough of his memories back that he remembers who Bonney is, or those might just be completely gone. And maybe Vegapunk tried to preserve them and it didn't work. Okay, weird thought. Follow me on the tangent. Somewhat weird thought. What if one of the different satellite bodies, because there's 6 of them, and then there's the main Stella body. What if one of the main satellite bodies, one of the 6 of them, has Kuma's memories? Because we don't know when all of them were made. We don't know when when Kuma being turned into the pacifista started exactly. We don't know when his memories would have been like fully taken out of him and everything, when he's no longer himself. What if one of the others has Kuma's memories inside of them? Maybe not active inside of them, but what if they're inside of one of the other bodies for safekeeping? That might be a good idea. Because since Atlas knows and probably recognized Connie and Luffy and Jinbei and Chopper and everything, probably recognized them as, who they actually are or whatever, then maybe they sent back a signal to like, because like, Shaka and Lilith know that they just interacted with the Straw Hats, and then, because of the aircon system and everything else on the island that monitors everything, Atlas is like, oh, well, I found, the captain and, Jinbei and Chopper and, Jewelry Bonney is with them. And maybe it's like, oh, well, maybe we have to, get all of them together because we know that Zoro wants to go talk to Vegapunk about something, and Frankie probably wants to just go talk shop with Vegapunk, and Usopp would probably enjoy that as well, and Luffy and Chopper would love to see all the robots and everything, of course. Of course. But what if one of the other Vegapunk satellite bodies has Kuma's memories? As I said, not active inside of them, but maybe it's within one of them for like safekeeping, and maybe that's going to be like, oh, well, you need to actually go and find, like, Vegapunk talks to Connie, talks to Bonney, he's like, oh, well, yeah, I have your dad's memories and everything. They're actually inside of this satellite body, and it's over here, and if you go there and get them, then they can, give you the memories, and then if whatever point in time you do find your dad again, you can give him this disc or this floppy drive or whatever, and it'll restore his memories. Or maybe he just straight up has, like, the Bibble. What if Vegapunk just, like, has the Bibble, and that maybe had all of, like, Kuma's stuff, memories and everything inside of it, and that's why he had it with him, because he had it with him when he was at Sabaody, and I don't think we saw it with him when he was at Marijois. I don't think he wouldn't have had it with him, because he would have had it while he was, like, crawling around, because, like, that's what the freaking celestial dragons were making him do. What if it was he left the Bibble with Vegapunk for, like, safekeeping, and maybe it's like, oh, if you return this Bible to your dad, and then there's, like, something inside of it that will, like, connect with, the part of, Kuma that's, like, still buried inside of him, and then that'll reawaken all of his memories and his personality and everything. Or it may not be that simple. I might just be like, we have to get it back here. I have to get back to Kuma and give him this, and then I can reinsert his memories and everything inside of him. He'll still be a cyborg. He'll still have, like, the lasers and everything, but he'll have his memories and his emotions and his free will back, which is the best circumstance that can happen for Kuma. but it's also a slightly more unlikely circumstance. But it all depends on how Vegapunk turns out to be an ally or a neutral or an enemy or whatever the case may be. But the government's on its way to kill him, so I'm pretty sure he's just going to be like, here, take whatever that you want. I don't care. Take the nice clothes. Here, take the machine that makes food. Take all of this. I don't care. The Marines are on CP9s or CP0s on their way here to kill me. I don't care what's going on. I already built the pacifistas and the seraphs. I'm going to just flip all the switches on them and make them go haywire. They'll actually be your allies. Don't worry, it's fine. I don't know. Although Bonney seeing the Seraph Kuma would be kind of a hard thing to probably deal with in that regard as well. If seeing the police officer version of him also like kind of messed with her, seeing the other versions of him as well will probably also cause her some issue to a degree. So that's what we have. As I said, it ended up being longer than I thought, but I had like several different tangents that popped into my head in that regard. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye.
I'm begging you, please don't hurt my daddy.